They called it the worst trade in the county. A half-starved cowboy with holes in his boots and dust in his pocket handed over his last bag of feed for a lame draft horse nobody wanted, not even for glue. The crowd at the auction laughed. One man spat. But Silas Kane didn't flinch. He looked that horse dead in its one good eye and said, "You and me, we're not done yet." What Silas didn't know was that old horse had once hauled gold across the Sierra trails, and he still remembered exactly where it was buried. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a ride into the Old West. They gathered under the brutal afternoon sun like buzzards on fence posts, ranchers with fat pockets, boys with slingshots, and old-timers with crooked backs and sharper tongues. Dust curled around worn boots as the livestock auction sputtered toward its sorry end, and what remained in the corral looked more like charity cases than beasts of burden. That's when Silas Kane stepped forward, hollow-eyed, coat threadbare at the seams, a man whittled down by loss and lean seasons. His boots were cracked at the toes, his hat sagged like a wilted leaf, and his coin purse was emptier than the promises he'd once made to a dying wife. All he had left was a sack of mule feed slung over his shoulder, and the kind of quiet resolve that made lesser men nervous. The auctioneer was packing up when they brought out the final lot, a swayback draft horse with a limp that looked permanent and an eye clouded with cataracts. The crowd jeered. One man chuckled. "That thing's halfway to glue," another said. "Even buzzards pass." But Silas just stared at the horse, gray as smoke, ribs like rafters, and legs stiff as barn timbers, and in that one good eye he saw not pity, not death, but memory. Something old, something waiting. Without a word, Silas unslung the feed and tossed it to the auctioneer. "Trade," he said. Laughter erupted like thunder across the square. "You'd have better luck feeding a ghost," someone yelled. A rancher leaned in, spat near Silas's boot, and muttered, "You're touched." But Silas didn't blink. He walked to the horse, touched its neck, and nodded once. The horse didn't flinch, didn't shy, just stood there, breathing slow and steady, like it remembered what it meant to be trusted. They walked out of town under a sky bruised with dusk, the wind tugging gently at Silas's coat, the horse limping but proud beside him. Past shuttered storefronts and crooked fences, past fields left to dry and dreams left to rot. The two of them, broken in body but not yet in spirit, walked the 2 miles of hard trail back to Silas's shack, a lopsided thing made of scavenged boards and rusted nails. Inside, the stove was cold and the floor groaned with every step, but it was home. Silas rubbed the horse down, gave him a name, Barlow, and poured water into an old tin trough. As night swallowed the land and coyotes howled like grief on the wind, Silas sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap and whispered to the dark, "We'll make it, old boy, one way or another." He didn't know why he believed it, didn't know why the weight in his chest lightened just a bit as the stars blinked awake above them. Maybe it was foolishness, maybe desperation, or maybe, just maybe, he saw something in Barlow that no one else could, something still buried, waiting to be unearthed. Hope didn't shout. It didn't stomp its boots or raise its hand. It whispered, and in the stillness of that dying night, Silas listened. Silas rose with the sun the next morning, a thin blanket of frost clinging to the dry ground, and found Barlow already awake, staring into the distance like he was waiting on something or someone. The old draft horse stood still as a gravestone, ears twitching, nostrils flaring gently with the breeze. Silas rubbed the sleep from his eyes, chalking it up to the kind of odd behavior animals pick up after hard years and rough hands, but the feeling lingered like a thorn under skin. Over the next few days, they made short rides to gather firewood and check the old traps scattered across the canyons and gullies near Silas's land. Each time they set out, Silas noticed the same thing. Barlow would walk a stretch of trail slow and easy, then without warning stop cold, head high, ears locked. He'd sniff the air like a hunting dog and stare into empty woods, or down a ravine that hadn't seen a wagon in 20 years. The horse would shift his weight, look back at Silas with something close to urgency, and then step forward, always in a new direction, always toward nothing. At first, Silas thought it was a broken animal chasing ghosts, perhaps remembering past riders or old routes to greener pastures. But it wasn't random. No, there was a rhythm to it, a pattern in Barlow's pauses and glances, A steady line traced through trees and broken fence posts, as if his hooves were following the faded trail of something long buried. On the third day, they reached an old creek that had run dry in summer but now trickled again with early meltwater. Barlow hesitated at the edge, then backed up 3 paces, turned, and stepped to the side, standing just upstream. His hoof stomped once hard. Silas dismounted, walked to the spot, and found, embedded in the mud, the shattered remains of a rusted iron bridge hook once used to lash planks over narrow water crossings. He knelt, touched it, and a chill ran up his spine that wasn't from the cold. That night, Silas built a fire and sat quiet as smoke curled toward the rafters, Barlow asleep in the lean-to stable outside. The heat did little to thaw the weight in his chest. He kept seeing the way the horse had looked at him before stepping to the side like he'd done it before, like it mattered. As flames flickered along the rough wooden walls, sleep came heavy and strange. And in that sleep, Silas dreamed. He saw wagon wheels grinding through snowdrifts, heard men shouting, horses panting, and the high-pitched scream of metal on rock. Gunfire echoed across canyons walled with pine. A chest slammed shut. Boots ran. Someone shouted, "Leave it, we'll come back." And then silence, thick and final. He awoke sweating, throat dry, ears ringing with the last of that voice fading into memory. Wind moaned against the walls, and Barlow shifted outside, hooves clicking softly like a clock ticking down. Silas sat up, stared into the dark, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Something was moving beneath the surface, beneath the horse's silence, beneath the cold dirt trails they rode each day. Not just memory, not just ghost. A trail. One meant to be followed. And something, deep in Silas's bones, told him that trail wasn't done being ridden. The wind howled through the cracks in the barn roof that morning as Silas rolled up the old saddle blanket draped over Barlow's back, meaning only to shake out the dirt before tacking up for another foray along the horse's strange, instinct-led wanderings. But as the blanket dropped to the barn floor in a cloud of dust, something metallic clinked to the ground with a dull, aged weight. Silas knelt, brushing away bits of hay and mold to reveal a rusted horseshoe heavy, thick, far sturdier than any made for regular riding stock. It was misshapen, the curve bent with time, but a faint marking caught his eye. Shallow, hand-etched letters barely visible through the corrosion. Asterisk, asterisk, SGW, asterisk, asterisk. He ran his thumb across them slowly, his heartbeat ticking up like a kettle on the boil. He turned the shoe over in his palm again and again, staring at the letters like they might speak. That night, unable to sleep with the horseshoe burning a hole in his thoughts, he saddled Barlow and rode the 5 miles into town beneath a slate-gray sky. The blacksmith shop was quiet at first light, just smoke curling from the chimney and a few sparrows picking grain off the road. Jed Trammell, the smith, was a man of few words and fewer smiles, but he looked up when Silas entered and offered a curt nod. "Need a shoe replaced?" he asked. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and held the horseshoe out in his open hand. Jed didn't touch it at first. He just stared. Then slowly, carefully, he took it and turned it in the light filtering through the soot-streaked windows. When he spotted the engraving, his fingers tightened. "Where'd you get this?" His voice was low, too low. "Was buried under an old blanket on a horse I picked up," Silas replied evenly. Jed's eyes narrowed. "What horse?" Silas nodded outside, where Barlow stood tied to the post, chewing on dry grass like he'd never known the weight of history. Jed stepped past Silas and peered through the open door. His face stiffened. Big gray, heavy build, scar under the left eye. Silas felt a chill move through him. "Yeah." Jed came back in, quieter now. "That ain't just any horse. He's draft stock. Used to haul freight for SGW Sierra Gold and Western." Silas recognized the name. The company had vanished from the territory 2 decades earlier. Rumors thick as fog. Something about a missing shipment. A big one. Jed nodded toward the horseshoe. Those were forged custom, built to carry weight up near the ice trails. Only a few ever got made. That mark was their seal. And that horse. He glanced toward Barlow again, a flicker of memory in his eyes. "I think he was on that trail when the gold disappeared." The words hung in the air like smoke refusing to fade. Silas felt the ground shift beneath him, not physically, but deep in his gut. He remembered the dream, the wagons, the snow, the shouting. And now here it was, a real piece of that long-buried past, rusted and silent in his hand. Not a ghost, not a dream, a lead, a path, a truth waiting beneath the dirt and years. He left the smithy without another word, the horseshoe tucked carefully into his coat, heart pounding with questions and a fire he hadn't felt in years. Maybe that gold was gone forever. Or maybe it was just waiting to be found by the right man and the right horse. The name Eli Green had come up more than once in whispers around town, always in connection with the lost Sierra shipment. Always spoken with the hush folks reserved for ghosts and unfinished stories. With the rusted horseshoe weighing heavy in his coat and questions burning holes through his thoughts, Silas rode out to the edge of town where Martha Green, Eli's widow, still kept to herself in a sagging farmhouse overgrown with blackberry vines and silence. The porch creaked under his boots as he knocked, and when the door opened, Martha stood framed in shadow, her face lined with years of grief and hard living, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "I ain't got nothing for the likes of you," she said before he could even speak, voice flat as slate. But Silas didn't move, didn't argue. He simply turned, gestured toward Barlow, who waited patiently at the gate, steam rising from his flanks in the crisp morning air. For a long second, Martha said nothing. Then she stepped past the threshold and squinted into the light. The moment her gaze locked on the horse, something broke behind her eyes like a pane of old glass cracking without sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. "That's Eli's horse," she whispered, almost to herself. "Barlow. I thought he was dead." Silas nodded once, gently. So did most folks. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. A few minutes later, they sat at her kitchen table, the room filled with the scent of dust, old wood, and something like rosewater faded by time. Silas told her what little he knew: the dreams, the trail pauses, the horseshoe. Martha listened without interrupting, her hands folded tightly, knuckles pale. Then, without a word, she stood and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she held a folded, yellowed piece of parchment. Its edges were singed, its surface creased and soft with age. She laid it on the table like it was something sacred, and Silas leaned in. The drawing was rough, a mountain range, a winding trail, and a red X near what looked like a box canyon, but half the map was gone, torn clean away. "Eli rode with 3 others that winter," she murmured, eyes never leaving the map. "They were hauling the company's last run before the snow set in. Word is someone ambushed him in the high Sierra. Eli made it back to camp, bleeding out. He gave me this and said one thing before he died. Follow the horse. I didn't know what he meant. Till now." Silas stared at the map, then back at her. "This don't show enough to get there," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, "but that horse might." Outside, Barlow shifted his weight, tail flicking against the cold. Silas folded the map and tucked it into his coat, his pulse echoing loud in his ears. He stood, tipped his hat, and paused at the door. "You sure you want me to find it?" Martha's voice came from behind him, soft but certain. "If you do, put Eli's name on the headstone he never got." Silas nodded once and walked into the wind, a torn map in his pocket, a ghost horse at his side, and a trail older than memory whispering to be ridden once more. Something was buried up there. Not just gold, not just bones, but the last truth of a man who never made it home, and Silas intended to find it. The mountains rose like sleeping giants as Silas and Barlow crossed the last line of fence posts marking the edge of known land, the wind sharpening into knives the higher they climbed, the scent of pine and ice thick in the air. The trail was barely a whisper, no signs, no markers, just Barlow's slow, deliberate steps, hooves crunching over patches of snow that lingered in the gullies like forgotten sins. The torn map Martha had given him offered only fragments, a hint of terrain, a red X dangling in mystery. But Barlow moved like he'd been here before. The old draft horse stopped often, breathing hard, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the wind or stared into nothing except it wasn't nothing. At a rocky bend high above the valley, Barlow pawed at the dirt until Silas cleared away a layer of snow and found an iron ring bolted to a flat stone, rusted through, once used to tie down freight wagons. Further on, he scraped at a tree where a faint W had been carved into the bark with trembling hands long dead. At first, Silas second-guessed him, tried to redirect the path according to the broken map, but each time he did, they ended in thickets or dead drops. When he let Barlow lead, they always found something: an abandoned trail spur, a pile of ancient firewood blackened with rot, a splintered wagon spoke wedged in rock. Hunger gnawed at them both. The salted meat Silas had packed ran out on the third day, and the snare traps came up empty. He rationed dried apples down to the seeds and chewed pine bark to dull the hollow in his gut, while Barlow scraped lichen from stone and sucked snow for water. But Silas didn't turn back. Not when he saw the way the horse's ears twitched at unseen echoes. Not when the wind shifted and Barlow halted at the same spot for the second day in a row, staring east, head high, legs locked like a statue carved by memory. There were nights they slept curled in cave mouths or beneath wind-gnarled pines, frost crusting their eyelashes, breath ghosting through the air. Silas wrapped his coat tighter and lay awake listening to the mountain groan and crack around them. And always, when he looked up through the trees, the stars seemed to point in the same direction Barlow walked. He began to speak less, trusting silence, watching, learning the rhythm of the trail, the signs the horse gave, how his tail flicked when they neared old iron, how his steps slowed when the scent of something old clung to the earth. Somewhere in those quiet moments, Silas stopped thinking of the gold as just metal. It became something else, a story half told, a truth that refused to stay buried, a man's last words scrawled in hoofprints. History wasn't just pages in a ledger or names etched in stone. It was alive, bleeding into the dirt, pulsing in the wind that battered their faces and howled through the passes. By the end of the fifth day, both man and horse were thinner, slower, but their eyes burned with same fire. They crested a ridge where the land fell away into a wide basin ringed with cliffs, and Barlow stopped, ears perked, body still. Silas followed his gaze. Far below, a faint line twisted through the snow like a scar, a forgotten trail, and he knew Barlow was leading them not just to gold, but to the place where legends died, and where one just might be born again. The creek bed was half frozen, its water whispering beneath a brittle skin of ice, and as Barlow stepped into its shallows, he stopped cold, neck arched, ears pinned forward in a rigid, unnatural stillness that made the hairs rise on Silas's arms. He followed the horse's gaze to a twisted mound of wood and iron lodged against the stones, what remained of a wagon wheel. Its spokes shattered, the iron rim bent like it had been struck by something hard and fast. Silas knelt, hands trembling as he brushed away dead leaves and mud, revealing splinters of wood worn smooth by time. And beside it, something else half buried in the moss. A rifle cracked down the middle, its stock split as if it had been used in desperation, in close combat, not from a distance. A few paces up the bank, Barlow froze again, pawing once at the ground, then standing absolutely still, head low, breath coming in long, deep pulls like prayer. Silas approached, eyes narrowing. The soil had settled strange here, mounded and uneven, with old stones lining its edges in a rough oval, nearly lost to brush and time. On one of those stones, barely visible beneath the lichen, were crude carvings scratched into the surface. Asterisk, asterisk, Eli G. Asterisk, asterisk. Silas went still, the breath knocked clean out of him. He dropped to his knees beside the grave and bowed his head, hat in hand, the silence of the mountains pressing in like judgment. "You brought me to your rider," he whispered, voice rough with something that wasn't just sorrow. Barlow didn't move, didn't even blink, as if he too remembered the man who'd once ridden him through snow and fire. Silas placed a hand on the grave, fingers cold against the stone, and for a long time neither man nor horse spoke or stirred. The world held its breath. But as the sun began to bleed behind the peaks, casting long shadows through the pines, a chill crept in that no fire could chase. That night, Silas made camp nearby, the fire built high, its flames snapping loud in the stillness. He sat with his back to a boulder, revolver resting across his knees, Barlow tethered close, the horse twitching his ears at every sound. The howls came just after midnight high, keening cries rolling down from the ridgelines above. Not close, not yet. but near enough to remind a man that teeth and hunger still ruled these parts. Silas didn't sleep. He kept the fire alive, fed it with every dry stick and scrap he could find, watching the shadows flicker and twist like they were trying to speak. And still, something gnawed at him, something beyond the wolves, beyond the grave, beyond even the rifle snapped in half like a wishbone. He was being watched. Not by men, not yet, but by the land itself, like the mountain had memory. And now that he'd disturbed it, it wasn't so sure it wanted to share. Barlow stayed alert too, never laying down, never relaxing, just standing sentinel as if guarding the grave of the only man who had ever truly known him. As dawn crept in, the fire dwindling to embers, Silas stood and faced the trail ahead, eyes dark with resolve. Whatever had happened out here hadn't ended with death. It had lingered, festered. And now, he was walking straight into the center of it. But he wasn't walking alone. The wind carried whispers long before Silas heard boots on the trail, whispers that started back in town, where loose tongues and sharper ears filled the saloons with speculation. And one gambler with too many debts and too few scruples had leaned too close in the blacksmith's shop, catching just enough of Silas's low-voiced questions about SGW, and a certain rusted horseshoe to set wheels in motion. By the time Silas crested the next ridge, 3 men were already days behind him. Hard-riding bastards with pistols on their hips and greed in their eyes, one with a busted nose and a rifle too clean. Another who hadn't stopped chewing tobacco long enough to notice he was being followed by his own stench. And a third, the quiet one, who never smiled and had a scar running from jaw to temple. Barlow felt them first. The horse had grown restless since they left Eli's grave, ears twitching, steps halting more often, nose lifting to catch scents carried on the high wind. On the second morning after, as Silas broke camp near a frozen pond, Barlow refused to move forward. He stood rigid, eyes locked on the trail behind, and then without prompting turned and began walking off the path entirely, up a slope so steep it left Silas scrambling for handholds. That's when he heard it. The faint clatter of hooves, the telltale scrape of iron on stone, too clean, too fast. Someone was tracking them. Silas didn't hesitate. He spurred Barlow harder, letting the horse choose the route, trusting instinct over map, and they ducked through a gully choked with fallen trees, branches whipping past like claws. Behind them came the echo of shouted orders, gunmetal glinting between pines. At the mouth of a wide clearing, Silas reined in hard and spun, revolver already drawn. He fired 3 shots high into the trees, warning, not kill shots. The gunshots cracked through the air like thunder, and for a breathless moment, the men halted, surprised to have been spotted so soon. Turn back, Silas shouted into the wind, voice raw and sharp. But greed doesn't scare easy. A bullet skipped off the rocks near his feet, and that was answer enough. Silas turned Barlow again and gave him his head, letting the old draft horse thunder into a ravine barely wide enough for a deer. It twisted like a snake, dipped low, then rose sharply, hidden from sight unless you knew it was there, and Barlow knew. His hooves never faltered. Silas ducked low, branches slashing at his coat and face, heart pounding like war drums. Behind him, curses echoed, horses skidding, men unfamiliar with the land pushing to keep up but already falling behind. Rocks tumbled down in their wake. Barlow plunged deeper, breath labored but sure, every muscle pulling with the memory of old trails and hard freight. Silas glanced back once, just once, and saw them faltering, not yet lost, but not yet close enough to kill. For now, it was a chase. But soon, it would be a reckoning. As dusk rolled in and the ravine opened into a narrow glade ringed by granite, Silas slid from the saddle, pressed his ear to the wind, and whispered, "They're coming, boy." Barlow snorted, tail swishing, the fire in his one good eye flaring with something ancient. They were hunted now, but they weren't running blind, and they sure as hell weren't running scared. The wind at the summit screamed like a wounded thing, flaying Silas's face raw as he and Barlow climbed the last ridge of the ice-raked pass, the world narrowing to jagged rock and sky as pale and ruthless as bone. Every muscle in his body ached, each breath came thin and sharp, but the horse didn't falter, not even as snow began to fall sideways, driven by wind that carved the skin from stone. Then, at the edge of a flat, wind-scoured ledge where the land dropped off into a basin of shadow, Barlow stopped. He stood perfectly still, his breath steaming hard and loud, then dropped his head and began to paw at the frozen ground with slow, deliberate strokes, hooves scraping ice and shale. Silas dismounted, watching as the horse dug deeper, grunting low. A sharp clink echoed up through the snow metal striking metal. Silas dropped to his knees, bare hands plunging into the freezing earth, clawing away slush and gravel until his fingers struck something solid. He cleared more, breath catching as the edge of a weather-worn iron box came into view, its corners rounded by time, seams fused shut with rust and cold. With a cry torn from somewhere deep in his gut, he heaved the thing loose, dragging it into the open as Barlow stood watch. The box was heavy, dense as judgment, and when Silas smashed a rock against the edge until the latch broke free, it fell open with a groan like something exhaling after 2 decades of silence. Inside, even through the gloom, the glint was unmistakable bars of gold stacked like bricks in a grave, each one stamped with the Sierra gold and Western seal, dulled with age but still beautiful, still whole. Silas stared, hands shaking, the weight of it sinking into him, not just the gold, but what it meant. He saw his cabin, could almost feel warmth in the hearth again, a new roof, land, dignity, maybe even peace. But before he could close the box, the sound came faint at first, then swelling, rolling like thunder down the valley, hooves, fast and closing, the claim jumpers. Their horses shrieked as they spurred through the trees, angry voices echoing off stone. Silas snapped the lid shut, hauled the box behind a rock ledge, and looked to Barlow, who was already tense, muscles twitching, ears pinned back. They'd made it to the end of the trail, but the fight wasn't over. Silas's fingers tightened around the revolver at his belt, heart pounding not with fear, but fury. He'd ridden too far, lost too much to let wolves in men's clothes steal what was never theirs. The box could wait. The gold would wait. What mattered now was making sure it stayed with the right man and out of the wrong hands. Barlow stomped once, a sound like a war drum on the mountain's skin. The fortune was real, the danger even more so, and the trail wasn't finished. Not yet. The canyon walls closed in around them like jaws, steep and unforgiving, granite rising sharp on either side with only a single trail curling back down the mountain behind them, and that trail now thundered with hooves and hunger. Silas scanned the terrain, breath ragged, boots slick with ice and grit, and knew there was no outrunning this. He didn't curse, didn't panic. He simply reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the 2 sticks of mining powder he'd packed weeks ago, meant for avalanche deterrence or clearing fallen rock, never dreaming he'd use them like this. Barlow stood calm, though his flanks trembled from exertion, breath steaming in heavy clouds. "Ain't your fight, boy," Silas muttered, voice low as he knelt behind a rocky outcrop and began jamming the charges into a seam in the canyon floor where the trail narrowed a natural choke point, perfect for one last stand. He ripped a length of cloth from his shirt, wound it tight for a fuse, and soaked the probable end in the last of his oil. Then he scattered dry branches and pine pitch along the path leading up, building a crude wall of firewood in desperation. The first shot rang out behind them, a bullet skipping off stone, close enough to sting. Silas didn't flinch. He struck a match, whispered, "Thank you," to the horse who had carried him farther than anyone had the right to ask, and touched the flame to the fuse. It sparked to life with a hiss, slithering like a snake toward the powder as Silas leapt onto Barlow's back and spurred him down the opposite slope. Behind them, fire roared up from the pine wall, smoke choking the narrow canyon. Then thunder. The explosion cracked the sky in half. Flame and rock vomited from the mountainside, a geyser of dust and light that swallowed the path behind them in a shower of stone and ash. The world jolted. Birds scattered. Snow slipped from the high ridges, and the screams of startled men echoed and then vanished beneath the collapse. When the dust finally settled, the canyon mouth was gone, choked with rubble, impassable. The gold box strapped behind the saddle was dented but intact. Silas's arm bled from shrapnel, his face smeared with soot, but his eyes burned clear. He didn't look back. The trail ahead was longer now, twisting through forest and gulch, past clawed hills and long-forgotten graves, but it was theirs. Barlow walked slow, each step careful, heavy, but steady as time itself. Night fell before they reached the tree line, and Silas lit no fire. The stars above burned like cold eyes, watching their return. Bloodied, beaten, but not broken, they rode through the dark, two silhouettes against a mountain that would hold the scars of their passing for generations. Behind them, the gold was sealed beneath a broken trail. Ahead, home waited not the shack, but the beginning of something new. Silas reached forward, resting a hand on Barlow's thick neck. "We did it, old boy," he whispered. The horse didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silas rode back into town under a sky thick with spring haze, the road caked in mud and memories. Barlow's hooves slow but certain as they clopped through the main street like a quiet funeral march for the man he used to be. He had no gold strapped to the saddle, no sacks of coin dangling from his belt, just a dusty coat, blood-stiffened cuffs, and the same tired horse that everyone still called useless. Heads turned as he passed, and then the sneers came, soft at first, then louder, braver now that he looked broke again. "That fool went chasing ghosts," someone muttered near the barber shop. "Spent winter in the hills talking to a horse," another chuckled from the saloon steps. Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. He rode past them with eyes forward and spine straight, the weight of every secret gold bar hidden miles beyond their reach pressing warm against the silence in his chest. He returned to his old shack for a time, repairing the roof with fresh pine, patching the stove, mending the fences, but little by little, things began to shift. A month later, the town's general store, long on the verge of collapse, was quietly bought out. The new owner never gave a name, but inventory tripled overnight. 2 weeks after that, the saloon changed hands, renovated, cleaned, stocked with better liquor than the town had tasted in years. Then came the bank, purchased through a proxy. Folks started whispering. No one saw the deals happen. No one could trace the money. But everyone felt the shift, like the town itself was being pulled upright from the roots. Silas never confirmed a thing. He didn't dress finer, didn't strut or boast. He still wore the same coat, rode the same gray horse, tipped his hat to the same skeptical faces. But when the banker who once turned him away had to come calling with a forced smile and lowered eyes, Silas only nodded and offered no more than a "mornin'." Gossip spun wild around him, claims of hidden mines, Indian treasure, government secrets, but the man at the center of it said nothing. He kept to himself, walking the ridge trails at dawn, speaking soft to Barlow as they rode through the pine. And one day, when the sun sat golden on the roofs and the air smelled of summer grass and second chances, Silas passed the auction yard where it had all begun. The wood rails were sun-bleached and sagging, the same patch of dust where he'd once traded a bag of feed for a horse no one wanted still dry and cracked beneath his boots. He stopped there, let Barlow nuzzle at the fence, then reached out and rested a hand on the old horse's mane, fingers sinking into the coarse hair with quiet affection. A boy nearby asked his father who the man was, and the father only shook his head, muttering, "No one you'd know." Silas just smiled, not at them, but at the memory. "Told you we'd make it," he whispered. Barlow snorted softly, and the two of them stood in that sunlit silence, not as a poor man and a useless horse, but as something else entirely, proof that sometimes the world gives you one last ride, if you've got the guts to take it.